Peace and salam. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Thank you so much for joining us. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We're on Galaxy 19 satellite, reaching throughout the United States, east to west, north to south, whole Canada and Mexico, and 57 million subscribers, mostly in the rural America and Canada. You can also watch us on OTT devices like Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and you can download our app on your iPhone and Android. If you like, you can watch it on YouTube as well. If you do that, do remember to subscribe. We like to have more YouTubers also connect with what we have to do. And we always have interesting conversation. People from all around the world connect with us. And today we have similar type of people who have something unique to say. Unfortunately, virus continue to be all around us. 1.85 million people are dead around the world. And in the United States, 352,000 people are dead. And it seems we're all suffering from that, but more attention need to be paid to science. And I would also say more attention need to be paid to ourselves and our Creator. Science and godliness, which can improve our individual and personal behavior, is very much needed. But let's talk more science today than godliness. That I will limit for my sermons. And to discuss with us is Professor Robert West. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, and you're coming from London, so good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Robert West is Emeritus Professor of Health Psychology at UCL London. He specializes in addiction and behavioral changes. Behavior change is something which quite interests me in talking with you. And we also have Lois Privor-Dumm. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Lois.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Communication. You got 3 departments under your belt. At the International Vaccine Access Center of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Well, first to London, what is this virus which people are calling a British virus? Is it some type of a super virus?
Yeah, well, so in fact, there's more than one important mutation that's been identified. One, we believe, was first seen in southeast of the UK, the British virus, shall we say. But there's another mutation which has originated in South Africa, and there's another one, an important one, potentially coming from Nigeria. And I think first thing to point out is that we knew right from the beginning that coronaviruses of this sort do mutate. They mutate very, very rapidly. Most of the mutations have no clinical significance, but just by the law of averages, every now and then you might expect one to mutate in a way that does make a difference. And that's what seems to have happened both with the UK one and the South African one, possibly the Nigerian one. The result is that this particular variant of the virus is estimated to be somewhere between 40 and 70% more transmissible. We're not absolutely sure why that is. There are various possibilities in relation, for example, to the amount of virus that's shed or the way that it attaches to the particular receptors on cells. But for whatever reason, it is now the dominant form of the virus in the UK.
Oh, it is the dominant form of virus.
Yeah, it's now there's more of this going around than there is the previous version, shall we say, because it's really like very, very rapid version of evolution, because it's every time it goes into a host and replicates, you get mutations, and then if you get a mutation which gives it a survival advantage, for example, being able to transmit more readily, then it will transmit more and will take over, from the other strains.
So, Lois, what is the situation in the United States? Is it, I mean, in UK, it is the dominant one, and we have not stopped any flights or anything, and our record of spreading viruses seems to be beating rest of the world. So I mean, I have seen news here and there, but is there any estimate how prevalent it is in the United States, the new strain?
I don't think we quite know yet. It's still very early and we're still starting to detect it. We've detected it in a few places around the US. The experts suspect that it's probably more prevalent than we're seeing, but a lot of it depends on how much you're looking. And until you really start looking, you won't actually know.
So you gave me another question right in your answer. Why we are not looking? I mean,
well, I think we are right now, but it takes a while before you start the process and really begin to see what's actually happening.
Is it something to do with the UK has done more, analysis and research than the United States?
Well, I don't know that you could say that the UK has done more. I think what the US has done is different. So we're taking a lot of steps to be able to detect the virus, but perhaps not looking at the specific strains.
Robert, tell me, in terms of research, how do you compare, British systems looking into the virus and discovering and making decision based on that as compared to the United States?
A lot of similarities as in many areas of science. I think the US and the UK actually collaborate very extensively on research. I know my own research, much of it is done in collaboration with very similar sort of approach to the subject, and that's true for vaccine development. It's also true for virology and epidemiology. I think that the UK in this particular case has an organization which sequences the genome of the virus very comprehensively and very regularly to try and figure out how it's developing. The US also has similar facilities. So I think they're both countries are pretty advanced in terms of the science. I think that probably where we've been, both countries similarly have been less successful, shall we say, is actually in the application of that science to policy, and that's where I'm afraid both our countries have somewhat fallen short.
But that sequencing of genome, I mean, in UK, it's double of what US has done so far. In terms of sheer numbers, despite the population here being larger. So in that way, I think it is very important for probably the US to understand how widespread it is to have those sequencing done. Is it an independent entity or is it a government entity? Who does this genome sequencing there?
In the UK, it's government funded, so it's centrally funded. But I think there's a somewhat different relationship in the US and the UK, from my experience, in terms of how independent the funding in medicine and clinical science certainly is of the funder. So US is a massive, by far the largest funder of medical research in the world, with very, very for us, very generous budgets. But at the same time, I think from my experience anyway, I'd be interested to know what Lois feels, but that in the UK the funding is a bit more hands-off probably than it is in the US.
Now, who is when will we be able to know for sure that why this virus is more contagious than the earlier version of it? Anybody has any idea about that?
Looking to Lois for a comment.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question.
So, I mean, research on this thing has pretty significance and pretty fast. I mean, scientists take their time, but it seems like tens of thousands of people are researching this virus, and probably whoever is researching, communicating that information. So has the scientific information communication within the scientific community has evolved beyond the writing a paper on peer review and journals?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been very striking about this is that a lot of the scientific communication now is first done through what we call preprints. So in the bad old days, as it were, you would do your study, you'd write it up, you'd submit it to a journal. If you were lucky, maybe if it was a very, very efficient journal, a few weeks or months later, you might get a response which says you've got to revise and resubmit, and then you'd revise, and literally months or sometimes even years would go by before your results saw the light of day. Now we have much, much more rapid communication and evaluation of scientific findings, and that's been really important with the virus because, to be quite honest, the advice that my group gives to the government, I would say at least 50% of the articles and the science that we are communicating to the government is in the form of what they call a preprint. Now, it comes with caveats because it's not been through peer review, and that's really, really important. That people understand that this has not been through the proper evaluation process. But at the same time, it's it's giving you the basics of the findings and gives you something to go on. Where in other circumstances, you would have nothing.
Lois, it is heard that its impact, the new virus impacts children much more than the original one. Do you think, your communication system are coming up with language to have this around the country? Because our schools are open most places. And so who is looking into it, that the children and the parents, educators and parents are thoroughly aware? Or is it true that it impacts children much more than the earlier virus?
Well, I think that the virus still impacts adults, most substantially. And I think we need to remember that and take care of that. What we don't know is how much children are vectors of transmission. What we see is college campuses where we suspect that there's a lot of transmission happening there, and we're seeing that, in some of the younger age groups. As far as the younger children, they're still important, and it's still important to look at everybody in the population. And there's quite a bit of conversation going on in the US around schools and who is at risk, and really quite a bit of debate still. You see, depending on where you go in the US, that certain schools are open and other schools aren't. And there isn't actually consistency across the nation. And that has created, I think, a lot of confusion and in some ways division, where some people want to really shut everything down and see that everybody is kept safe, where others really feel that it's important to educate children in person because they are struggling. As far as what we know about the new strain, I still think that that's fairly early to be able to determine.
What is the research in UK, Professor West, about, because you have a public schooling system there, and you're saying now the new virus is the most dominant virus there. So what is research and what is public policy on that?
Well, the research is not good news, really. What was not finding good news? I mean, it's becoming very clear that although children are not particularly clinically affected, for the most part, I mean, there are children who are very badly affected by it, but the clinical symptoms and so on are much less severe, and most children will be asymptomatic. However, what's becoming very clear from the research, certainly in the last month or two, is that they are major vectors of transmission into the community and through their parents and through adults and teachers and so on. And that's the cause for concern. And so right now, I mean, today in the UK, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson is going to be making a statement later this evening about this whole issue of schools and what should happen, because unfortunately, particularly with the new variant, not even necessarily because it's more transmissible in young people than it is in older people, it's just more transmissible, full stop. It seems pretty unlikely that we'll be able to get the infection rate down unless we substantially restrict the transmission in schools. And what people like myself are calling for is not a question of keeping schools open or closing them, which is a binary choice, but actually the government, and I would imagine the same would be true in states in the United States, developing a COVID secure education strategy. And that involves investment. I mean, there's no two ways about it. You have to invest in ways, for example, in which children who can be taught online, either at home or in special places set up for the purpose, can do so safely and effectively. And where children do have to go into classrooms and in schools, that the infrastructure is secure. So it has good ventilation, that you've got good spacing between pupils and so on. It can be done. It requires investment, but the not doing it is so much more damaging to our future, to the children and to our society.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Professor Robert West and Lois Privor-Dumm, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adam. You remember me? I appeared in so many episodes that Sound Vision has put on the market. No matter what. Hey, what's happening? Hey, oh, sorry. Lockdown is what it is. Well, continuing here. In this lockdown, Sound Vision never stops thinking about you, the viewer. We'll have to get back into production again, online and inline. Everybody in their own space, even me. Although I'm stuck with Lanisa.
Salam! Salam! Salam!
I know, you were shocked too. Well, let me continue. This is what I was going to say. Salam! 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 Cut! 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 Finally, I get my own screen time again. Thank God. And so we invested in new equipment to bring you even better production with new songs and new singers and animations. Well, here are a few clips. And Sound Vision has brought all this into your home, making Islamic values and teachings easy. And if you know me, Adam, a multi-talented actor, well, sometimes I'm an actor and the reporter and the... Oh, that's enough. Let's move on to the next section. Well, you can watch these new episodes on our new app at www.adamsworldapp.com. We have previews happening every day on Muslim Network TV. Sound Vision has been serving generations, moving and changing with the times. We are all faithfully connected. That is a huge blessing. Your donation helps keep these programs available now and into the future. We take this job of helping tomorrow's Muslims today seriously, and you should too. Today, we need your help. Children absorb and learn from everything they encounter. Make that wholesome, positive, grounded in our faith. Together, we can accomplish our goal of raising better Muslims, better neighbors, and better citizens. Please donate generously. It's an investment in our future. To finish, let me tell you, there are new scripts of my new mission. And it is something that I enjoy talking about. My new mission is space. Houston, we do not have a problem. Salam, see you soon.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and we're talking with Professor Robert West from London and Lois Privor-Dumm from the Johns Hopkins University. Is this particular strain of virus more deadly?
Well, no. As far as we can tell, it has similar clinical features to the previous strain, but it's still early days, so it may take a little while before that becomes clear. But at the moment, it looks as though it's neither less nor more deadly, as far as we can tell.
And but if it is if it spreads more rapidly, then because of the speed, it might claim more lives.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. And in many ways, and again, I defer to Lois on this one, but in many ways, a virus can be more problematic for society by virtue of its transmissibility than its inherent clinical morbidity and mortality, because of course more people in total numbers become affected by it. Viruses thrive by virtue of being transmitted, not by killing their hosts. And so in a way, from the virus's point of view, it doesn't want to kill anyone, but if it can spread very rapidly and only kill a small proportion, well, that's good for it, but it's still really bad for us.
So you let me understand. So mutation in viruses normally tend to be, or exclusively tend to be, towards replication speed, not its deadliness. Am I correct in saying that?
That's a really good question, Lois. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, so but I think there's different ways in which viruses mutate. So we still really need to study this one and understand what the implications will be.
Yeah, because I was just very surprised to see that this, coronavirus corrects its mistakes when it replicates. So mistakes in what area? Mistakes that it is not moving fast enough, mistake that is not killing enough people. Does this virus has a brain of its own?
Well, not really. I mean, so the way it works is that the virus actually makes a lot of mistakes. I mean, the viral RNA, these RNA viruses, every time they go from one person to another or they replicate in people, they're making mistakes all the time. Most of those mistakes will cause that particular virus to die. It won't replicate. But and a lot of the mistakes, the majority of the mistakes, won't have any implications at all. It's got a lot of genetic material in there, much of which is not particularly relevant to its survival or its clinical features. But just by law of averages, because of the sheer amount of mistakes that it makes, every now and then it makes a mistake that makes a difference to its ability to replicate and to transmit. And it could be, it can do it in many different ways. And that's why, I was quite circumspect about, how this works, because it could be, and we think that this may be what's happening here, that it improves its ability to attach to the receptors, are what they call the ACE2 receptors in this particular case on the human cell, which allows it to enter the cell. So if it improves the ability to do that, then that gives it a bit of an advantage. But it also could be that it results in greater viral shedding. So you end up with, and this also seems to be true with this particular strain, that people who've got the virus end up actually shedding more of the virus than the other strain. But there's lots of other ways it can do it as well. There's not just one route. So, and that's why it's so hard to, to pin it down, really.
And I think what really comes into play is that people understand what their risks are and how the need to be able to protect not only themselves, but protect others. And this, along with that, comes a personal responsibility to be able to take public health measures like social distancing and ensuring that you're wearing a mask at all times and washing hands and things like that. So along with what the virus is actually doing, we also need to consider how people process that information and what actions they take because of it.
Lois, I'd like to engage you on that, what you just said. I'm reading stories of people who have suffered and stories of people who have died. More to understand, more to... And one of the things which I notice is that people who are extremely careful in these three areas, personal hygiene and social distancing and use of masks. Some of them are, professionals in healthcare, and they still, without noticing any mistake they have made. One person, two of them actually, I recently read just a couple of days ago in New York Times, that couple never stepped out of their home, except one occasion on which they went to their daughter's home with, who is a professional, hair care person, she was tested to be negative. Still, she stayed home after tested negative for several days, didn't have any symptom. And in her home, not in her office, they still sat with all the mask on, and they still got it and died.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing many, many of these stories. People who are dying are not necessarily the careless people. There are those as well. So one challenge is that, what wrong can I do to be subject to this virus?
It's a tough thing to accept, because you can do absolutely everything right and still be exposed to the virus. This is a very tough virus to deal with. There's all you can do is take all of the steps that are possible, but you still need to live your life. And the hope is that we can get better testing, get vaccine access to be able to protect ourselves. But there's still a lot of steps that we'll still need to take to protect ourselves, because ultimately we live in the world, and you can't be a hermit, closing yourself in and not seeing anybody. And, because that isn't good either. You still need to go out. You still need to seek medical care when needed. You still need to live your life and be able to work in your job if you're still working, and see people. And so, all we can say to people is that you need to take every precaution possible. But until everybody is protected, nobody will be protected. The virus can still find you. Now, fortunately, those cases are rare. So that's one of the things that we have to remember. Those are the things that appear in the news. Those are the things that, get people's attention. And it's important that we hear about them. So people are reminded that we're not invincible, that you can do everything right. You can be young and still get this disease. You can, try and stay inside for the most part and still get this disease, that you need to be vigilant at all times.
Well, I need to talk to you about vaccine and the behavior. A whole lot of things are connected there. But before I go there, why no one is talking about, we're talking about vaccine, but not about any medicine? Is there a substantial multiple party doing research on finding how to treat people better?
Yes, there is a lot of research going on, and as you'll be aware, there's research showing that really cheap and simple medicines like corticosteroids can improve survival rates in people who are seriously ill. There's also research going on into other sort of novel therapies, monoclonal antibodies, and so on. So yes, all of that research is going on. And I think it has already, certainly in the UK, I'm pretty sure it has in the States as well, paid dividends in terms of the survival rate among people who find themselves in hospital or in intensive care. To give you an example, it was originally, because people thought this was, a sort of flu-like type of virus, they treated it as such and treated it in terms of the way they gave people fluids, as though it's a flu-like virus. Now, this turned out to be a really bad idea, And once they recognized that, they've changed the management of patients in ICU. And that has improved survival rates. You've got steroids, you've got the management, you've got use of thrombolytics, because we now know that there's a problem with clotting in these patients. So the treatment and management is definitely improving. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize that that isn't going to be the main way that we tackle this, because even with the best treatments, people will die, and people will get seriously ill. And now you're probably hearing in the States about this thing, long COVID, which is where people, even with relatively mild symptoms to begin with, experience a protracted condition, which can often be quite debilitating in terms of cognitive impairments and so on. So we've got to stop people getting infected. That's basically the answer here.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we're also seeing is that people may take a long time to go to the hospital, to get to the point where, particularly those in communities that maybe are distrustful of the health system, they don't want to go right away, or maybe their doctors tell them to stay at home and self-treat. So by the time they reach the hospitals, that's when medicines work less well. We've improved quite a bit, but when you're arriving in a more severe state, that's when you really have problems, and you really want to be thinking about prevention in the first place.
Yeah, this is, I have heard that in the United States, the minorities especially have been vulnerable. And same thing in UK. An earlier report from UK came out, Muslims are 5% of the population, except that 20% of the dead at the initial phase were Muslims. So I think that is a topic in itself, but let's take a short break. And when we come back, talk about the behavioral aspect as well as vaccine. You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. And with me is Professor Robert West and Lois Privor-Dumm. And we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's world because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's world because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. Now, it is being said in the media and all over that the current vaccines will work against the new virus as well. On the old virus, there were tens of thousands of people were tested, but what mechanism allows scientists to determine that it will work on the new variant in UK or Britain?
The reason that we believe that it should work as well with the new variant is that the mutations that are affecting this new variant, the ones that have a substantial impact on its transmissibility, there's around 23 of those on literally many thousands that affect what's known as the spike protein, which is the way that it gets into the cell. And the way the vaccines work actually is to target very large numbers of the parts, if you like, of the spike protein. So it's not necessarily particularly problematic if you get a mutation that affects a small number of those. The antibody should still recognize the virus protein and mount a defense against it. Now, we don't, that's not guaranteed. So we can't say for sure that will happen, but that's the expectation. And I think we also have to be very careful to I would say, have contingency measures in place in case we do need to start thinking about developing, future versions of the vaccine in a sort of similar way as we do to the flu vaccine, to deal with mutations. I don't think we can assume that the current vaccines will work forever, and so we do need to have a production line in place to make sure that we can keep up with mutations as they occur that might affect their response to the vaccine.
Lois, when do you think the vaccine will be available to people who are not in priority areas? Rest of the population.
So I think that's the million-dollar question, and it's a question of two things. One is when it will be available, and the other is how many people that are our priority will actually go and take the vaccine. So there's two dynamics that are happening at once. Right now we're still at the very early stages where we're just vaccinating frontline healthcare workers and the elderly that live in long-term care facilities. And we're finding that that's going much slower than we had hoped. I think one of the decisions that will need to be made is sooner rather than later is if those health providers or if others that are eligible for the vaccine not going to get the vaccine when it is available, do you want to start opening it up to others that may receive it sooner rather than later? There's also talk right now about whether they give perhaps half doses of vaccine. I think it's still early to tell, whether that's a viable strategy, but one of the things that would do is make a number of vaccines available sooner rather than later. The goal is to be able to immunize everybody, obviously, as soon as possible, but we also have to look at some of the challenges in being able to reach as many people as we want to reach.
As new types, at this moment, there are two vaccines from two sources that are available. Is the capacity of other organizations, other firms who are coming up with vaccine, do they have a higher level of capacity to produce?
I think they absolutely do. So if you look at the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, for example, they've gone to Serum Institute of India, who has enormous capacity to be able to produce vaccines, and right now produces many of the vaccines available in the world. So I do think that there is the potential for expansion. We also have other manufacturers whose vaccines are still going through the phase 3 trials, but are looking promising. So you have J&J, you have, other smaller, biotechs that may produce vaccines, as well as the GSKs and Sanofi's and Merck's of the world. So I think there will be a significant number of more doses of vaccine. It's just a matter of when and knowing which of those vaccines will be successful.
So is June or July this year is the time when everybody who wants to have it will have it in USA and UK?
I think that's a good question. It's not out of the realm of possibility. It may logistically take a little longer than that, but I think we don't know yet.
Okay. So what is the situation in UK? Do you think UK will have everyone done vaccinated by the end of summer or beginning of summer?
Probably not, I think, in the UK. And it's not because it's not possible. I just think that I'm afraid that our government hasn't quite got its act together to do what's needed to make that happen. But it is certainly logistically possible. There are all sorts of hurdles in the way. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a general practitioner, a retired general practitioner, who's on a pool of people who've volunteered to give the vaccine. The red tape, the bureaucracy that has been put in the way of effectively harnessing this pool of volunteers is quite extraordinary. And that is an issue. But I mean, there are supply chain issues. For example, obviously with the Pfizer vaccine, it has to be stored at very, very low temperatures, which makes it a little bit more difficult to roll out and to give in certain kinds of locations. The Oxford AstraZeneca one is more sort of conventional in a way and can be stored at temperatures that most locations would find perfectly viable to do. So there's lots and lots of vaccines coming through the pipeline. So in theory, we could do it by the summer. I just doubt whether in the UK we will get there. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, because we do need to get it rolled out as fast as possible. The issue of the half dose is a very important one and is causing a lot of consternation here in the UK. By half dose, what I think people mean is that normally with these vaccines, you'd give 2 doses, either 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or in some cases 12 weeks apart. What the UK government has said is that it wants to, in order to get the first dose into as many people as possible, it wants to delay the second dose by up to 12 weeks. Now, for the Oxford vaccine, that's certainly within the regulatory approval, because the studies that were done, the second dose varied from about 4 to about 12 weeks. And if anything, the 12 weeks seem to have more efficacy. With the Pfizer vaccine, the company itself are quite clear, and looking at the data, I think I kind of agree with them on this, that you're taking a bit of a risk with that particular kind of vaccine, because it's possible. We don't know really whether if you delay the second dose much beyond 3 or 4 weeks, whether it's going to have the same level of overall effectiveness as they were seeing in the clinical trials. I mean, maybe we will, hopefully we will, but it is taking a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, and I think they're also looking at giving 2 half doses of vaccine as well, to see whether that has specific efficacy. But again, I think they're looking at it with the Moderna vaccine, is my understanding.
Right.
It's still probably early to determine whether that's a viable option or not. I think, like the UK and the US, there is a lot of concern over giving just a single dose and not following up with that second booster dose.
So options are being considered, and I hope that industry is also checking it out. If the requirement of keeping it, minus 70 could be, they can improve on that as well. So there are, quite a bit of, variables there to predict the future. So Let me ask you this question. I mean, everything in the world until recently was being supplied by China. And a whole lot of things. They are the master of mass production, it seems. Now, what is the status of their vaccines? And is the Western skepticism towards China somehow is limiting information about their progress and how they can scale up the production if their vaccine is as good as the other vaccine, which we normally hear about or implementing right now?
It's a really good question. Lois.
I was just going to ask if you wanted to take that question. I think there is a lot of skepticism about Chinese vaccines, at least in the US. Now, in other parts of the world, I think what we're seeing is that the vaccine will be used. Now, whether it ever is used in a US or other setting, I really don't know. Robert, what do you think?
It is interesting. I think the UK is not as paranoid about China as the US is. I think it would be fair to say, but we're still a bit paranoid and a bit skeptical. And I think my own view, to be honest, is unfairly so with regard to their technology and so on, because I'm just thinking about another experience I've had, a sort of Western view of medicine, which is actually, to be fair, in my opinion, cost a lot of lives. And I do a lot of work in smoking cessation. And there's a drug that was produced in Eastern Europe by the Russians, but actually it was produced in Bulgaria, called cytizine. It was licensed in Eastern Europe in the 1960s for smoking cessation. I did a clinical trial in 2011, which showed that it was highly effective for smoking cessation. And there's now 2 clinical trials showing it's probably at least as effective as our current licensed drugs. That was a drug that was available in the 1960s. And my view initially on this was, I think, the same as many of my colleagues, which is, well, it's made in one of these other countries. We don't really think they're any good at it, so it probably doesn't work. And we were completely wrong. And so I think that we should be a bit more accepting of or open-minded about technologies coming from these other countries. And to be fair, if you look at China's technology, in many areas, it's incredibly impressive. So I wouldn't rule it out, and I would take any opportunity I could, I think, to use something that could help.
Yeah, and the Chinese have made successful vaccines. So it's not as though they're not proven manufacturers. So some of them are WHO pre-qualified, meaning that they've been reviewed and accepted for use in different parts of the world. So I think it is clear that a Chinese vaccine could be a very useful tool. The question is whether certain countries would accept it or not.
Okay. So Lois, now let's talk about the world. I mean, if it is not clear that even the West will have all vaccinated by summer, what's the scenario for the rest of the world when they will get it?
Yeah, and this is very concerning. So this is a really important topic, because unless the whole world is protected, nobody is protected. We've got to remember that we do live in a global world, and the estimates right now are going into 2022, 2023, and that's a long time to be able to wait. So we really do need to ramp up production of vaccines, be able to find ways to get enough funding to get the vaccines, not just out to healthcare workers, but to all of the populations that will need the vaccines. So I think this is an area that really does need further emphasis. And what's happening right now is that the wealthier countries are, reserving probably more than I think by some estimates I saw it was 50-60% of the doses out there, or if not more. So, right now in the early stages of the pandemic, I think the concern is that it's only going over to the countries that can afford, and there's many others out there.
Are there any efforts around the world to create more factories, assuming that these companies will be willing to license on the terms acceptable? Is there, if you're talking about a year, 2 or 3 years, I mean, you mentioned in 2023. So, and the way the world is, this pandemic has proven that you need to be able to figure out how to come up with a vaccine and produce in a fast manner to reach everybody, because no one is safe until everyone is safe in this. If all of that is true, then production capacity is as important. I mean, the world's capacity to produce a virus, I mean, it was far faster than any time in history, right?
Yeah.
But our capacity to produce for mass vaccination. So are there some research and thoughts and some factories being developed right now?
Well, the one thing that I think we have to remember is that it takes time to be able to build that capacity. So plants can't be built overnight. There has been an unprecedented effort to look to other places and to not just keep it within that limited number of manufacturers. So one of the things that at least has been somewhat encouraging with the pandemic is the recognition that there needs to be a greater number of doses out there. I think what is challenging to figure out is ultimately what will be the demand for those number of doses. Because to be able to invest in the factories that can produce the vaccines, you need to be sure that you're going to be able to get those doses out and that those will ultimately be sold, because it is a very, very significant investment to be able to do that. And if you look to previous pandemics, what we've seen is that the expectation is that the demand initially would be very high. And the example here would be H1N1 in 2009. Yet when the production finally caught up, there was no longer the demand for the vaccine. And so I think in the early stages of the pandemic, nobody knew, is this something that's going to stay around? Or is it going to extinguish itself, and therefore all of the investment that we've made will not actually be used?
So issue of the market capitalist economy versus lives of people and socialist consideration. So it goes to ideology, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how it will be. It will be handy. Well, I like to thank you. It was an interesting conversation. I learned from both of you. So thank you so much, Lois Privor-Dumm and Professor Robert West. Truly appreciate your time being with us. And thank you, Sherdil and Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. And thank you for watching. Muslim Network TV is there 24/7 on Galaxy 19 satellite and many other places, on OTT devices, Apple TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV. And you can go on our own website, muslimnetwork.tv, or download the app on your Android and iPhone. Oh, so many places to watch, so little time. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.
Thank you.